How are you, folks? Dave Brown back here with the New Populist. Thank you again for joining me. In today's video, I want to talk about Kamala Harris and how she speaks in front of different audiences. We are seeing a pattern where when she's in front of a suburban or rural whiter audience, she speaks one way. And then when she's in front of a black urban audience, she speaks a different way. And if you notice this and you're white, you're often accused of being a racist and not understanding that black people and people of color have to code switch, which is when we speak a different way depending on what audience or what group of people we are around. So there's actually a formal definition of code switching in the dictionary, and it says this: code switching, process of shifting from one linguistic code, a language or dialect, to another depending on the social context or conversational setting. So depending on where you're at, you might change how you speak. And it's actually very true. If you are, say, a black person and you grew up in, let's say, Compton, California, all your friends are black, all your friends are from a certain socioeconomic class, you hang out with them, you grow up with them, you play with them, you may learn to speak a certain way. But let's say you later go on to college, and now you're in a more formal situation. You, of course, may not speak the exact same way. You may adopt more traditional speaking habits. So there is a legitimate case where people do switch from speaking informally in front of their friends in a more traditional black urban way, if you're a black person, say from Compton, and then changing up when you're in a more professional setting or at work. So it is legitimate. But the key here is that person learned those speaking habits in a natural way from being around it, especially as a small child. The problem with Kamala is that she never had that experience. She was born to an Indian mother and an immigrant Jamaican father who was a professor, educated man. And as a small child, she went in between her father's house and her mother's house in Palo Alto and in Berkeley, California. Then there's a few years where she lived in the Midwest in some college towns. And then later, when she was 12, she moved to Montreal, Canada. And this is in the late 1970s. And she went to high school there and graduated high school there and was there until she was 18, 19 years old. And now Montreal, Canada, back in the late 70s, how many black people do you think lived there? Hint, not a lot. So her own background does not show that she was around this traditional black urban environment where you might learn to speak a certain way, which is why when she does speak a certain way or mimics that, it's incredibly phony. And I think more black people, by the way, should be offended by the idea that just because you have black skin means that you talk a certain way. Being black doesn't make you talk a certain way. It's being around a certain environment. I actually know white guys who speak a lot, quote unquote, blacker than I do. Why? Because they grew up in black neighborhoods. So there should be no way of speaking attached to one's skin color. And that's the problem with Kamala. They're attaching a certain way of speaking to her skin color, despite the fact that she was never actually part of communities that spoke that way. And again, that is why it is incredibly phony. So I want to play a few examples of her getting a little more urban. The first one is an interview, a very produced and phony interview that she's giving where she's talking to a lady about issues going on in the country. So check out this first clip right here.
Madam VP, I know you've been traveling across the country. What are you hearing?
Yeah, girl, I'm out here in these streets. And let me tell you, you're right, Taraji. There is so much at stake
In those
in this
streets.
moment.
Yeah.
The majority of us believe in freedom and equality. But these extremists, As they say, they not like us.
No, they not.
There's a full-on attack on our fundamental freedoms. The freedom to vote.
Yep.
The freedom to love who you love. The freedom to be safe from gun violence. The freedom for a woman to make decisions about her own body, not having her government tell her what to do.
So you see her inflection there. She's in those streets. It makes me cringe when I watch that, because again, that's not who she is, not at all. But I will say, as a person of color, sometimes you do feel pressured to embrace, quote unquote, your blackness. But the older you get, if you are a secure person, you go, I'm not playing that game. I'm who I am. I'm okay with that. And I don't need to be pushed into embracing anything and being phony. And speaking for myself, again, I'm a person of color from the Washington, D.C. area. I never really adopted too much of the urban vernacular because of who I grew up around, even though I was in a black county. And at my age now, I feel no obligation to. I speak the way I speak, and that's fine. There is no obligation, if you're black, to speak with a certain vernacular. You speak the way you speak because that's what you were around. And I wish more black people would get away from the idea that you have to do that, because I don't think it's very constructive or helpful, especially in a country where if you want to be successful, if you want to go into business and go into higher socioeconomic jobs, or jobs that provide that status, speaking like you're from in the ghetto or with a very harsh urban vernacular does not help you. So I don't embrace it just because you feel you have to. I think that's pointless. Now, here now is an example of her speaking in front of a crowd in Detroit and one in Pittsburgh. Again, notice the difference in how she speaks, and it's ridiculous.
You better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. You better thank a union member for vacation time. Thank unions for sick leave. Thank unions for paid family leave. Thank unions for your vacation time.
So I guess you can tell which audience was the Detroit audience, right? Clearly the first one, and the second one, she's in Pittsburgh, and wow, her the way she comes off, even when she's not doing her accent thing, she's not a good speaker and incredibly, let me use the right word here because I don't want to be accused of being sexist. It's just a little shrill, a little shaky. Her facial expressions, especially now, she's so uncomfortable. That's one thing I notice about her. She's in her interviews, she always looks very, well, interviews, she gave one. But she strikes me as a person who is incredibly insecure and unsure of herself. People who have confidence, who are grounded, who know what they are, who they are, and what they want to do, they don't go back and forth as far as their personality or how they speak. They're the same person all the time. Because they're grounded, they're confident, they're secure. And her, I see incredible amounts of insecurity. And for somebody who wants to be the leader of the free world, I find that particularly distressing. We are in very dangerous times. We are potentially heading into World War III if any number of hotspots get out of control. And do you want somebody who's not secure in themselves representing the United States and negotiating with Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin or the Iranians or the North Koreans? Do you want that type of person? Or do you want somebody who is secure in who they are? And for all of his faults, Donald Trump doesn't change who he is depending on the audience. He could be speaking in front of an audience in Mississippi or one in New York, And he's got the same suit on, talking the exact same way because Donald Trump is Donald Trump 100% of the time. And he doesn't change who he is depending on his crowd. And that shows that he is secure in who he is, even if he's a little bit abrasive or a little thin skin when he's attacked. That's all true. But he fundamentally knows who he is. And I think that's a very important thing for a leader or somebody who wants to lead a nation. And with Kamala Harris, it's concerning. It blows my mind that this race is even close when you have somebody like her who is incredibly unserious. She just gave an interview, her first one, heavily edited, not live, and she came off terrible. She came off unsure, unconfident, didn't have any real plans or any, even her talking points were just, of course, she memorized, weren't very good. So Kamala Harris, very concerning person. Her code switching is very inauthentic, and it surprised me that it fools so many people. And I obviously in a black area, she's very popular in black Democrat areas, and I wish more people who look like me would see her for what she is, which is a phony, to be frank. And isn't it ironic that we had Barack Obama, our first black president, who was raised in Hawaii around no black people, and then had to go to Chicago for his cred. Then we have Kamala Harris, who was raised around no black people. So us black people, we want our first black president, but we have people who culturally aren't really black, quote unquote. I just think that's kind of ironic. There are people out there who are, legitimately, from that culture. And those people, by the way, have no shot of actually being president. It's people like Kamala and Barack Obama that seem to get to that top there. I wonder why. It's interesting, but who knows? Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.